It is Friday, June 9th. Let's talk PlayStation. Hello everyone, welcome back to another fiery episode of LTPS. We are right in the middle of the not E3 season, so yesterday was Summer Games Fest, and we have more presentations coming up, so a lot of game news going on, and there is some PlayStation stuff in there, so as always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. The June PS Plus Essential Games are now live on PSN, so you can go claim those, and for our first story, let's cover the wildly exciting new PS5 system software update. This one is 23.01.07.40. Just improvements to the overall system performance and stability, and also they improved the messages and usability on some screens. Not the first time we've seen that changelog item, but it's always hard to really grasp what they've done here, but sometimes they do make meaningful little performance improvements behind the scenes that you may not notice, but it is there. We should be getting a fairly large update soon, like a new beta should be starting in the next month or so we'll keep our eyes peeled for that. Moving on to our next news story, the Western Digital SN850, or the officially licensed PS5 SSD, now comes in a 4TB variant. I only mention this because I see a lot of folks buying these, and that's all well and good, especially because it's so easy. It's basically plug and play outside of just the fact that you have to screw it in. But the 4TB variant, this one, costs an eye-watering $549.99 US. It's insanely expensive, and something where, as I cautioned, when this initially came to the scene with the first officially licensed SSD, but it was always great news that Sony allowed any compatible M.2 SSD, because the prices have dramatically dropped in the past 2 years. So even for 4TB, if you want to go to that storage size, I would highly recommend not buying this and just going for something else that's in the, I don't know what it is, 250 range, $300. If it doesn't have the heatsink, you can easily put one on, but I will always recommend just do some shopping before you grab one of these things. Moving on to Geoff Keighley's Summer Games Fest. Now, as we've seen before, Sony will have something for Geoff Keighley. Anytime he does a live stream, they'll give him either a small announcement or multiple big ones. It really, the spectrum is kind of big here, but we did see Sony have a presence there, so they announced the release date for Spider-Man 2. This was a small presentation. There's no new gameplay or anything, but the creative director, Brian, took the stage, and he was there to talk a little bit about the game. So we didn't get any major details, but we did learn that there's more villains than what's been shown so far, which I think was expected. And also, Venom is not tied to Eddie Brock. It's an original Venom story, so that's cool to see as well. But again, this is where they confirmed the release date, October 20th, so not quite September, but hey, that's close enough. And the pre-orders begin June 16th. Now, as we were also expecting, this is when they coincided all this stuff on the PS blog, so that's where they outlined all the pre-order bonuses. So at the very basic level, a standard pre-order is going to get you 2 early unlock suits, one for Peter, one for Miles, each with 3 color variants. You also get 3 skill points and the web grabber gadget. Then there's the digital deluxe edition for $79.99 USD. That'll include 10 suits, 5 for Peter, 5 for Miles, also additional photo mode frames and stickers, and then you also get 5 skill points in total. Then the big box collector's edition at $229.99 USD. That'll have a voucher for the digital deluxe edition. So we've seen this with other big box collector's editions from Sony. They'll include a voucher for, because that would apply to digital PS5 owners as well. So no disc, but they will give you a steelbook case to go along with it. So there's that. But also the big item here is the 19-inch statue for both Spider-Man fighting Venom. That looks so cool. Now, if you want this, it seems like it's only going to be on PS Direct while supplies last, of course. So pre-orders for that are going to start on June 16th, 10 a.m. local time. And if you don't have PS Direct in your country, they'll provide details later on availability. Also, we saw the box art, which is basically the 2018 box art. Very clean, simple, but now Miles is on the front cover as well. So I love the way this looks. I'm always a fan of very simplistic, but sort of, I guess, eye-catching or splashy box art. So looks nice there. But yeah, October 20th. And I think at this point, they're probably going to go MIA. So, we've seen that Sony will stay quiet after this info is out there, and then maybe a month or two goes by. But since the proximity of the release date is so close, that's when they'll start, by July or something, start the marketing campaign, right? Or July, August, around there. But yeah, I didn't really think the release date was going to be that far behind in terms of Sony confirming it. So, and I know one would ask, why did they not just do this during the PlayStation Showcase? You know, again, it's one of those things where if they don't announce it there, they're just going to do it later, you know, shortly after the event. So that's what they had at Summer Game Fest. Now, technically, that's where it ends when it comes to actual PlayStation Studio announcements at Summer Games Fest, but the big, you know, show closer for this event was a new trailer for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which, before even talking about the trailer, it was funny how this played out, because we saw throughout the week, starting on Friday, that they were putting out new developer comments on Twitter, and it was initially exciting to see them actually talk about the game again, but they were kind of weird updates. They didn't say a whole lot. You know, they were saying things like there's going to be new characters in Rebirth, which, okay, like, not surprising. That's how the game plays out. Or saying that it's going to have a rich narrative or something, which, like, okay, like, yeah, Final Fantasy VII does have a storyline. So very weird updates. It does turn out that the Japanese versions of these developer comments do have a bit more context. And also, we're now finding out that if you go back to those updates, there is some slight teasing going on in there that may relate to the trailer that we have now, but at least at the time, the two noteworthy updates in there was that they said you won't have to play the previous entry, so I would assume they'll include like a short video or something when the game boots up if you haven't played the previous one, and that'll get you brought up to speed. We've seen that done before with, you know, plot-heavy games like Mass Effect, right? When Mass Effect 2 came to PS3, there's a lot of examples, but probably something like that. And they also said the game will have a high degree of freedom, which that does relate directly to what Final Fantasy VII was so well known for back in the day, which is you leave Midgar and there is so much more to the game than just that initial area. So the trailer itself looked awesome. I mean, it's so fun to see new footage of this game, because you can start picking out these, you know, pivotal plot points and areas, and there's just, because that's the thing, the game does get so much bigger when you leave Midgar, and I think that's why there's just so much excitement to finally relive these big moments, but also understanding maybe what they are going to alter or change a little bit, considering that's not, you know, that's not completely off the table, and there's already a lot of speculation going on when it relates to Cloud and this sort of alternate timeline that Zack may be in, right, where, you know, that plays out differently. But there's so much going on. The footage looks really awesome. But we do also have a updated release window. So before it was just next winter. I think most were expecting it was not going to be this year, but they are still saying early 2024, which is really encouraging. And also, where they show the updated release timeline, it's also displayed prominently, or I should say proudly, on 2 discs. FF7 Rebirth is so big, it's going to have 2 discs on PS5. Now, that is good news. I'm seeing some take it as bad news or laugh at it, or, well, it's appropriately reminiscent of the original, which is a multi-disc PS1 game, but this is cool because this confirms that multi-disc PS5 games are possible. Not to say that it was impossible, but we have not seen one thus far. If a game does exceed Ultra HD Blu-ray's 100GB storage size, developers are just opting to lean onto a download on PSN, or in some cases hardly print anything on the disc, which is not ideal. So it is good news that they are willing to, you know, do this. With, we saw for FF16, the game is so far not going to have a day one patch. All the content on the disc playable offline. You know, I'm a big advocate and fan of that. And now we're seeing for this game, they are going to be the first ones shipping a multi-disc PS5 game, so you have the full thing on disc. It should be something where one's an install disc, so it's not something where you're going to play and then halfway through have to insert another one. I assume that's what they're going to do. So you'll just have an install disc, because that's how games are played nowadays. You're copying the game from the disc onto your local storage. But it is funny how they, you know, prominently displayed that near the end next to the release window. But absolutely exciting news, and happy to see that. Now, in other Final Fantasy news, speaking of 16, we had a story pop up about how Square might be concerned with Final Fantasy 16's current pre-order numbers. So what happened here was Imran Khan, formerly of Fanbyte, Game Informer, kind of funny. He was actually the one, if you remember, about 2 years ago before PS5 came out, or around the time the console launched, he was the one that mentioned that Sony is getting very aggressive with third-party deals, and also that the Final Fantasy franchise mainline would remain exclusive to PlayStation, which we've seen that is is very much true. But anyway, he had a new Patreon post where he had mentioned that he's heard Square is panicking slightly over Final Fantasy XVI's pre-order numbers, which are tracking behind Final Fantasy XV when accounting for the lower amount of launching platforms, which is the one part of the story that so many are missing because it's so easy to write the headline without that. So depending on where you may have heard this, you might not have seen the full context. Obviously, Square would account for that mathematically. They know the game is only launching on PS5, so it's this is one of those news stories where it's so easy to feed into the fanboy stuff when it's like, oh, it's because it's PS5 exclusive. They're accounting for the lower amount of platforms, presumably, and so that is something where that's what he's heard right now. It's funny because we just also had the producer Naoki Yoshida doing a recent interview. He was detailing how there's a sales plan for this game, and he is nervous about seeing the first week sales, but they basically have an 18-month roadmap for this game, and they're primarily hoping that things like word of mouth and the, of course, reception, help this game out tremendously to have some legs long term on the market. They're not, expecting this game to do 5 million on day one or, this and that or something crazy, some kind of big number, but they do hope it'll, sit on the market for a long time and consistently gain some traction. Now, having said that, it's interesting because comparing it to Final Fantasy XV, initially from what I can remember, that game had a very massive marketing push. And so much to where the point, it's hard to, I guess, compare it because right now we're living in the FF16 timeline. It feels like we're seeing so much about the game. So I can see how somebody would come to the conclusion of they're doing the same thing, so how is this any different? But Final Fantasy XV was really a unique beast on its own, where that game had a 10-year dev cycle. It was originally Versus 13, then it was rebooted, moved over to new platforms, renamed to a mainline, Final Fantasy XV release. It was just something where there was, and by the time it was ready to come out, it was a very big marketing push. So it was a different circumstance, and also, it's just consumer habits do change, right? So, and that's what Imran gets into, is that pre-orders are not a direct indication that, the game is going to do bad per se, but it's something that publishers do rely on before a game's coming out to gauge the overall interest and also get an idea of those guaranteed day one sales, or at least in theory, little asterisks on that, but mostly those pre-orders are sort of locked in sales that the publisher is expecting. And so, based on that, they're going to understand the roadmap of how much more they need to push the game, how many copies should be printed at the time that, based on how many pre-orders they have. There's a lot that goes into it, but still, that doesn't mean the game is going to do bad per se, although it's an interesting story to hear, so we'll have to wait and see. I don't think we can really say much else other than, if I were Square, I'd always be a little bit nervous about what I'm putting out, considering there's so many things they do release and they somehow do not meet their financial expectations. So, we've seen that Square has a bit of a problem with this, but, for now, we'll have to just leave it there. Now, one other Final Fantasy news story, last one, is an update on the rumor for the Final Fantasy IX remake. So, Giant Bomb's Jeff Grubb, recently speaking during a Game Mass Mornings episode, said he's heard about it as well, something where he's heard about it very recently, and I believe also Gamatsu corroborated that as well. So, we saw this game on the NVIDIA leak list. It probably is a real thing, and just it's progressed far long enough to where more people are in the know about, I guess, the progress on it. But we also have an update from the Reset Era user I'm a Hero 2, the one that put out all the Persona 3 remake info, which we'll talk about that soon, so that's why we'll keep an eye on what they're putting out there as well. But they say the gameplay is traditional, and also that it's not a remake to the extent of Final Fantasy VII, but it's also not just a simple remaster, kind of like what they did with Final Fantasy VIII, right? So maybe it's more like a Crisis Core, where they called that a remaster, but that very much, they did a lot more to that game than what would usually be defined as a remaster. So maybe something like that, or maybe a half step above what they did with that game. But considering they said the gameplay is traditional, that would imply that they're not going super crazy. But that's also why, with Sony, they may very well be involved and they want to lock the game down in some way in terms of exclusivity. We see that they are a bit picky here. They won't do, they didn't do anything with Crisis Core or the Pixel remasters, but, if it's a mainline entry that, is seeing a somewhat big high-profile release, which would be this game, then they might have gotten involved. So we'll keep our eyes on this rumor as well. With that said, let's now move on to the Persona 3 remake rumor, and I'm not even sure if air quotes are really necessary here, because Atlus themselves have leaked the trailer for that and also Persona 5 Tactica on their own Instagram account. The trailers are out there in their entirety, so we know these games are real. Persona 3 Reload is what the remake is called, coming early 2024, and then Persona 5 Tactica is coming November 17th. Now, the reason why we're talking about these again, they're not going to be PlayStation exclusive, but these trailers do only have Xbox platforms listed because they're going to be shown off during the Xbox Game Showcase this coming Sunday. And, it's something where all platform holders do this. When it's their presentation, they will announce multi-platform games, but they don't, specifically list the other platforms during their own presentations. So if it's anything like what Microsoft did for Persona 3 Portable and also for Golden, where they had a very strange 48-hour embargo where the other platforms could not be confirmed, be that as it may, just bear in mind, if you hear about this, if Sunday comes and goes and they're still for some reason not talking about the PlayStation or Nintendo versions, that is why, in all likelihood. So unless Microsoft themselves do come out and say they've locked the game down, then I would presume that PlayStation and Nintendo versions are very much on the way if you want to play the game on those platforms as well. Next up, and going back to the Summer Games Fest, because we had one other PlayStation-esque announcement there, which was a small teaser from PlayStation Productions for the Twisted Metal TV series, which I can't actually show because it seems like VODs from the live stream are getting Content ID claimed, so I'll just include stills, but it was a teaser, not a proper trailer, showing a clip of Sweet Tooth, voiced by Will Arnett, but played by Samoa Joe, and also Anthony Mackie's character getting into a squabble, so we see some dialogue and some banter there, right, because they're going for humor with this. It wasn't bad to me, but I can see why this was maybe not the clip to show for what is still a car combat based video game that's being translated to a TV show. Still gonna have some funny dialogue and slapstick humor and all that, but I don't know. Wasn't a bad clip to me, but I'm very indifferent on this whole thing. There were also new stills put out from a Hollywood Reporter interview with Anthony Mackie himself, but that series is releasing fairly soon, so I'm so curious as to how this is going to be received, and also how Twisted Metal diehards are going to feel about it. So far, David Jaffe, the series creator, is very enthusiastic for it, but he also thought this teaser was not that great. Moving on to our next story, we have a lot of news relating to the PlayStation business. So the first one would be, yet again, PlayStation 5 sales and how they've largely been doing still really good. So this one's from the UK, where PS5 console sales are up 81% year over year, at a time where Nintendo Switch is down 8%, which that's actually still pretty impressive given the where that console is in its life cycle. But we're also seeing Xbox Series X and S are down 19%. And then for the month of May, Switch came out number one given the release of Tears of the Kingdom, but this is the first month where PS5 did worse compared to May last year. So overall, it's still up 81% year over year in the UK, which is insane. I mean, there's not much more we can really say here. They're seeing double-digit, sometimes triple-digit growth year over year, because this is the first year where the console stock issue is not a thing. So still selling a lot of consoles. But on the flip side, we have some data coming from Circana, which tracks video game spending habits in the US. This is coming from Matt Piscatella, the executive director and games industry analyst at Circana, where he mentioned on Twitter that growth of video game subscriptions, the spending there has stalled. So April 2023's sub-spending in the US was only 2% higher than April of last year, saying new subscribers beyond console has proven difficult. And on the flip side of that, new a la carte premium releases have been doing really well this year, which that's not too surprising given that we have really been eating well this year. There has been so much good stuff coming out, and a little bit of everything for whatever platform you're on, whatever kind of genres you're into. We've had nonstop banger after banger coming out, so it's good to see that that model can still bear fruit. Not to say that that's the surprising part, but certain publishers are on this unsustainable path. But with subscription, we have seen with the platform holders that, I mean, that's the issue. There is a saturation point, and it is also interesting to see how both of them have approached this. And when I say both, I mean Microsoft and Sony in that sense. Well, Nintendo actually does count as well, right? So Nintendo and Sony have taken the approach of, we recognize that, and certainly Nintendo, there's not much beyond console we can reasonably do in the here and now. So, you know, what do? We just increase the average spend per customer, and that is the expansion pass, or that's PS Plus Extra and Premium. And Sony and Nintendo are very much in a position where they want to generate profits, and, you know, and that's why Microsoft very recently was candid about their approach, which we always saw, but it was a matter of, you know, taking this loss-leading initiative and trying to carve out their own path, which involves not only the Xbox console as a business, but Sony and Nintendo just are a bit more conservative in that manner. So, you know, Sony has the PC initiative. They have this mobile division that they're fleshing out. Nintendo has done things like this as well. Not quite PC, but you know what I mean. So, but with Sony, they're still very much in this position of the console is our core business model. That's where all of our money comes from, and the average spend on PS5 is much higher than PS4. It's about making more money and them recognizing that we are in a business where you're only going to sell so many consoles per cycle, right? There is that sort of glass ceiling that we often talk about. So that's where these two companies differ in their long-term goals, or at least for Sony, they're sort of short to mid-term, because that goes into our next news story, which is about cloud. So speaking with the Financial Times, Sony's Kenichiro Yoshida was very bullish on the cloud sector, but something where when it comes to games, of course, there's problems. So he was quoted saying, I think cloud itself is an amazing business model, but when it comes to games, the technical difficulties are high. So there will be challenges to cloud gaming, but we want to take on those challenges. He also highlights the issue of sheer player volume. So when people get home from work, you'll have a lot of people logging on, putting strain on the network, but during downtimes, it becomes financially inefficient operating during a time when few people are playing. Now, this is also something where we just had Jim Ryan mention during that investor Q&A for the business segment briefings that they have fairly aggressive cloud plans to announce in the coming months. So sometime this year, and I presume that's PS5 server blades, but I'm still so curious as to, like, when they're official, you know, how much better are they going to be from what we have right now, which is a not very good experience on PS3 and PS4 server blades. And it's something where Sony, obviously, they want to be well positioned in this space, right? And I would like to see them see an improvement here. I mean, it's not really a space I care too much for, but, you know, it is something where, and you'll see people advocate for this. You know, Stadia was not a bad experience for a lot of folks that were using it, and they really were all in on cloud gaming. You know, they'll always advocate for how good that was. Same for Microsoft or NVIDIA GeForce Now. I mean, you know, you'll have people that will say, hey, streaming does work. We are living in the here and now. But if you are somebody that primarily plays on PlayStation, it does not work nearly as well. So, you know, I've tried all of them. Sony's got work to do in this space. So I just want to see how much better or marginally better it's going to be when they finally do pull the veil off what I assume is PS5 server blades. There are so many advancements that do happen in the space, right? So they're really kind of just sitting here not doing a whole lot of anything, but as we've also said before, it's very costly to expand. So once they finally do something here, we will check it out. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very simple. You can follow the link down below. Supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are some of the news stories from this past week, and our Tuesday video was looking at Folklore on PlayStation 3. So this is the third entry in our new retrospective series that we're trying out, and I'm sorry this one came out so long. Layer and Haze are like 4-hour games with very simple stories, whereas Folklore is 15-20 hours on average. with 2 character perspectives for one murder mystery plot line. It's complex, but I really enjoyed that game, so it was super cool to finally sit down and play it. Go check out that run through of the entire game. And then coming up, as per usual, hopefully on time this time, is our regularly scheduled Tuesday videos. But that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.